Welcome to the Mystery College Podcast. Today we have Steve James on. He is the founder of many great movements like the Movement Koan Method. He is the host of Guru Viking. He's been at the Essen Institute along with many other awesome retreat spaces. He'll be at the Omega Institute soon. Welcome.
Thank you.
Great, Steve. So you've had like a really amazing, diverse spiritual journey. Like you've learned with many teachers like Len Mullen, among others. So what started you out with your journey of self-discovery and of self-empowerment?
That's an interesting way of putting it. A journey of self-discovery and self-empowerment. I'm not sure I would necessarily think of it in quite those terms, either of those terms, actually. But my interest in these sorts of meditation-y things, I suppose I had two early influences. When in my early days, I was an altar boy from about the age of 5. And that's a sort of assistant in the ritual of the Catholic Mass. And we would go to the early morning Mass where there was no singing, no hymns, no guitars and tambourines and, fireworks and pyrotechnics or whatever people do in churches. And so it was just the liturgy, just the ritual form, and very contemplative because of that. And so I got a sense then, I think, of the power of ritual and liturgy for contemplative ends. And my mother had this idea of a private faith. She didn't really believe that church was a place where you come together with people who to celebrate believing the same things. She instead had this idea that the Mass was a place where you came for your own sort of personal contemplation, relationship with, you could say, with God, or just orientation, worshipful orientation, or whatever you want to, contemplation, basically, on a kind of personal level. Of course, it's communal because you're all together doing and going through this thing, but it's not really about what you believe doctrinally or so, primarily. And so we didn't go to Sunday school, my brother and I. She didn't allow us to go to the, what they call it, catechism in Catholicism, where you go off to a side room and some volunteer will teach you the tenets of the faith. So, because she said that anybody who wants to teach Sunday school should probably be disqualified from teaching Sunday school. That's that old joke about politicians, And if you want to indoctrinate children, you probably shouldn't. Anyway, so I think that provided a kind of quite open, you could say, orientation towards contemplative things. Open in the sense of not being doctrinally limited. And then I was also doing martial arts at that young age. And I was very into that. And so I would read about martial arts, read lots of books. And of course, if you read books about martial arts, it doesn't take long for you to start reading books about the cultures from which those arts came from. And then, of course, religious systems in those cultures, very, prominent. And so I began to read all about these sorts of things and practiced what I found in the books, really. And initially, I'm talking about my, younger years. And of course, I understood these are all different religions and different sects, and I understood that. But I didn't particularly feel the need to, I suppose, convert or have some sort of allegiance to this, that, or the other. I just saw it as that boyish enthusiasm, an open diversity of ways of exploring. So I would say those are two of my early influences, But I wasn't really trying to discover myself, particularly. I wasn't that interested in that, or really I wasn't trying to empower myself, especially. I was more just curious to explore the territory of contemplative things, as well as the sort of the history of it and the different ideas and practices and so on. It was more, I suppose, interested in that kind of a way than it was self-oriented. I wasn't trying to get enlightened or trying to solve suffering, or I don't think a great deal about myself in that process.
Yeah, I appreciate the clarity of the distinction between like something that's more contemplative, explorative, and about the journey rather than some like a destination, for example. As I appreciate that distinguishment. So like, I'm wondering if there's like some pivotal moments in your journey where where your contemplative practice or experience may have taken a different turn or deeper turn into the well of your own understanding or contemplation or experience of the world.
That's a very interesting way of putting it. You've got an interesting way of phrasing questions, Jake, I must say. Quite thought-provoking. Something that deepened the well of understanding. Do you mean by that epiphany moments of insight, or this is that the sort of special experiences? Is that the sort of thing you're asking about?
Yeah. So there special experiences, moments where contemplatively something may have the horizons may have expanded even further. Like what was there like any pivotal moments that were informative to yourself?
Gosh, I mean, almost every book you read about a subject like this has the potential to broaden the horizons of understanding, I think. And almost every conversation, I have a podcast, I think you may have mentioned, Guru Viking Podcast, and I interview people, scholars, academics, practitioners, teachers, etc., about, in this sort of area. And each of those conversations inevitably broadens my understanding. So I'd say I'm very lucky in a way to be constantly challenged by, confronted with the possibility of opening up more, in terms of understanding. Of course, you meet certain significant teachers, and that has a big influence. And sometimes one even has special experiences, although in my case, they've all been accidental. We all have, I think, special experiences. And many of my guests on the podcast report using meditation and gaining meditation skill and sort of steering that towards having very special experiences of enlightenment or transcendence or union or that sort of thing. Through their meditation, they sort of arrive at that. That's never really happened to me. Any special experience I've had has always sort of happened by accident,
Mm.
as opposed to as a direct result of practice. Now, of course, there is that old cliche, perhaps it was Ram Dass, I don't know, who said that enlightenment is an accident and practice makes you accident prone. I think there's something to be said about that. But he would know, of course. But for me, I would say a lot of the biggest epiphanies and ahas I've had have happened to me, as opposed to been something I've achieved. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, it kind of makes me think of the concept of emergence, where like a lot of things collate in different areas of life, like either outside of us or within us, and so the right circumstances are cultivated for deeper awareness or insight to arise. So I'm wondering if there's any like it makes me think of some of like the other things that might be going on that might helped with the emergence of those qualities.
Right. I agree. And I find it difficult to distinguish really between the kind of change in perspective that happens from practice and the change in perspective that happens just to living and getting more life experience and encountering setbacks and successes and so on. Undoubtedly, practice focuses you in certain ways. For example, on the processes of the mind and the body and the interactions between those things. Issues to do with identity. For example, are you angry, or are you experiencing anger? That sort of thing. Are you different relationship to pain and discomfort and distress? That sort of thing, I think, is definitely directly in the purview of meditation practice. But on the other hand, there is also something to be said for just living a bit longer and maturing as well. reading things, meeting people, having experiences. I think that also contributes a lot. So I think.
Could you say?
Please
I don't know.
go ahead.
Is my audio working? I think my audio is fine. Right. So a lot of times when we encounter people who tend to engage in these subject matters, there is this underlying factor, of they're trying to market something. They're trying to either sell an idea or sell themselves as an ideal. And I will say upfront that you are one of the most grounded individuals that I've encountered in years with respect to the practice by and large. Because usually at around, this specific time period, you will hear some people go on a tangent about how, oh, this practice or that practice has revolutionized these many lives. And so this is why you should invest in this or that. And insofar as our conversation has progressed, you're simply saying things don't happen to me because I will them. Things happen to me by accident. I can relate to this as much. The majority of my spiritual experiences, if they can be called as such, were accidental. And I've heard from a lot of people who are or were neck deep in, folkloric practices that you don't call down spirits to do things for you. They either choose you or they don't. So things that occur, they're mostly experiential and they're mostly accidental. So would you say that your approach to mysticism or esoterica or whatever it is that you personally would call it, your own individual journey, is something of a combination between the scholastic and the experiential?
I suppose you could say that. Yeah, I suppose you could say that. To me, I see them as distinct but obviously related spheres. So I enjoy the history of religions and history in general. Actually, I'm really into it, and I like languages and doctrines and different systems of thought and things like that. I enjoy that, and I see that as kind of a hobby, if you want, in the sense that I enjoy it, and sometimes you get paid for your hobbies, but in any case. And then there's the practice part. And of course it's related, but when I sit down on the meditation cushion, for example, that's just a different sort of hobby. I see it a bit like that. It's related to the more scholarly, or I suppose we could say, informational hobby of learning about these things. And of course they're about sort of the same thing, but they're quite different, really, as well. There's so I sort of think of them as two different spheres, and I think it's okay to have both hobbies. Where one might go wrong is perhaps thinking that reading about something is the same as practicing it, and understanding lots of ideas and philosophies and things like that is the same. Being able to articulate emptiness, for example, verbally, is somehow the same as experiential understanding, which which is it's I think generally speaking, people will. Even the texts themselves will advise you against that.
Yes, absolutely. Do you think that, or have you ever encountered any degree of difficulty, for example, in collating and having some sort of degree of cohesion within your own individual philosophy or within your individual ideology for all of the diverse practices that you've encountered? Because scholastically, there are people who, to quote a Star Wars reference, they deal in absolutes. So you have a background in Catholicism. I too have a background in Catholicism, and within the Catholic doctrine, you know what they say. If you're not part of the church, then you're a heretic. And so early on, you sort of, if you're young, you have this dichotomy. If you're raised within that kind of background, where every other idea proposed outside of the auspices of the church is considered heretical. So how did you come to terms with, or perhaps the proper word would be, how did you eventually come to a more grounded and well-rounded approach to belief?
Yeah. And to interject quickly, Alex's background with Catholicism is rooted in the Philippines, so it may have had a different flavor or take than in Ireland.
Yes, that's a really interesting question. I would say I was lucky not to have a great deal of exposure to that kind of absolute thinking.
Dogmatism, yeah.
Yeah, the priest we had was a quiet, contemplative kind of person and didn't particularly push that. As I mentioned before, I was shielded from going to things like catechism and receiving moral or religious instruction from church members who I'm sure would have, knowing some of them would have held those kinds of views. Not all of them, but some of them would have done. And so I was lucky, really, not to be exposed to that. And I think, and then also in my teenage years, as I think is normal for teenagers, I went through a bit more of a phase of thinking black and white about moral issues and religious issues and things like that. But then eventually by the end of my teens, kind of got out of that and recognized that what I'd held to be fundamental, I didn't agree with anymore. And so I think a good dose of believing something in a fundamentalist kind of way and then changing your mind about it. If that happens to you once and you really let it sink in what's just happened, then I think it's a good inoculation against future fundamentalism. Because you say to yourself, gosh, I really thought that was true and I'm not sure now. So I think one holds one's views a little bit more lightly after that, hopefully. At least that was my experience.
Yeah, I'm taking the question and the answer that you shared too, and Steve, and it's making me think about like the diversity of podcast guests that you've had on, and what it's like to, have great immersion in many traditions and practices. And Alex and I have had a flavor of that through our podcast too, where we're just exposed to many ideas. And sometimes I find myself very seduced by that idea. It's like, wow, wouldn't that be cool to be like with Glenn Mullen, like being a Tibetan Lama for 50 years. What is that like? Like, how's his perspective of the world change? So I'm kind of wondering what type of thoughts or curiosities you've explored in relation to meeting your podcast guests, having all these amazing ideas shared with you, and which ones seem to have stuck?
Yeah, I think that's a very natural response to interviewing interesting people. Part of interviewing, I think, is you sort of, and depends on how you do it, of course, but I think one way of doing it is you sort of enter the world of the guest a bit, because you're listening closely to what they're saying. You're trying to build a picture of their worldview, and you enter in, and there's a certain amount of unless you do a very antagonistic interview where you really are having a debate or something like that, there's a sense in which you go along with the guest's view a bit. You go into, you enter their world, and it's natural, I think, for that to have the consequence of that sort of can stay with you a little bit afterwards, for a little bit, maybe a long, for a brief time or maybe a longer time. It's rapport, really. It's sort of it's rapport, the consequence of rapport. And the fact of the matter is, maybe I'll just say that. So it's a sort of consequence of rapport. I try to be careful to distinguish that kind of consequence of rapport from, I don't know, spiritual calling of some type. Yeah.
That's an important distinguishment. I think sometimes I sometimes have a difficulty like distinguishing those two. I'm like, oh, well, maybe I could check out Tibetan Buddhism, or like, oh wow, like becoming a Viking. Whoa, what's that like?
Right.
Speaking of Viking, that's this has struck my curiosity ever since Jake introduced yourself to the podcast. Where did the term Guru Viking Guru come from? Those are two very disparate terminologies from two different sides of the world. How did those two terminologies collide, and how do they best represent yourself and your worldview?
Yeah, I had to call the podcast something. So I didn't want to call it the Steve podcast. It's not very good, really. So I thought, well, what sort of works? And it's Guru because it's about gurus and religious things and mystical things and so on. That's the subject matter of the podcast. So that's the guru part. Although I'm not myself a guru, but I interview them. And Viking, well, I'm not a Viking either. Vikings don't exist anymore. So there is that. But I come from the Shetland Islands. I have a long red beard. I live on a boat. So that's the Viking part.
You're in a boat.
Yes, I'm living on a right now. That's right.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. That's amazing. I see.
It's a canal boat, so it's a sort of it's the name of the podcast. But of course, over time, it's come to be associated with me, so that occasionally someone will say the Guru Viking as if the Guru Viking is me, and I guess that's fine. It's kind of by that point becomes almost a sort of a brand name or a nickname or something like that. But originally it was just a fun name for the podcast. And it's a bit tongue-in-cheek. It's a bit, got a little bit of that British humor of self-deprecation and so on, which I think is also good. Now, the podcast itself isn't tongue-in-cheek or, like that, but the content is, well, not serious exactly, but it's not humorous particularly. But it's good, I think, to have a little bit of humor in there somewhere when we deal with these kind of subjects.
So this is where I made an intellectual assumption, and I am glad that I was mistaken, because Guru Viking. My first assumption was, hey, you have a good looking chap with a nice full red beard. I'm like, so if it's Guru and Viking, it's either a combination of Indo-European or Proto-Indo-European practices plus Norse spirituality. And yet here we are, a guy in a boat who just happened to, cobble together Guru and Viking. That's amazing. That is amazing.
You have the boat part down, which is awesome. Like you're ready to go to port. So you've done a lot of like really awesome survivalist challenges and like minus centigrade weather for days or weeks at a time. I'm wondering how like pursuing highly discomfortable experiences has informed your mindfulness practice or your day-to-day living.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. It's true. I have done those sorts of things, and how's it informed my day-to-day living? Well, I think one thing we can say is that those kinds of situations tend to be quite revealing, and they show parts of yourself that are difficult to expose in more comfortable, controlled circumstances. Just the break from routine is enough to destabilize, some of the patterns of a person a bit, and then taking away certain comforts and introducing maybe certain stresses like the cold or no food or something like that will also, mess with you a little bit. And I find that refreshing and clarifying, actually. And so what I've noticed is coming back from those sorts of experiences, it's a good test for meditation too. If you're meditating and so on, and in your life and all that, it's nice. It's good to go out into a situation like that and just see how your practice performs, how you do psychologically or emotionally and so on, or in terms of suffering. But I think coming back from those kinds of experiences, I've noticed a great appreciation for the simple things, the simple comforts. lowering of the threshold of satisfaction. And that tends to stay. I think that's actually also a trajectory that meditation practice offers as a possibility. You're just happier. It takes less to make you happy, somehow. Satisfied, maybe is a better way of putting it. And it increases satisfaction. As one of my teachers, Shinzen Yang, used to say, it increases your satisfaction, reduces your suffering. Has various other. He has 5 consequences of meditation practice. Those are 2 of them. So I've noticed that for sure, that coming back from such an experience, a greater appreciation for the simple things.
I think it's a very grounded approach to all spirituality in general. I mean, we have a saying in my country, only those who have known hunger can truly taste food. And there are not a lot of people, unfortunately have to go through that, or any kind of stressors in their lives, actually. It actually even speaks to a good chunk of the spirituality tourism that is going on in our world today, wherein back in the day, when you sought out spirituality, you sought it out because there was something intrinsically missing and or broken and or in need of guidance within you. Fast forward to today, you have people who seek out spirituality because they're bored. It's not that they're hungry or thirsty or that they're looking for something that can better themselves. They're bored. And that has taken, the entirety, or a good number of the spirituality movements down a very, shall we say, unsavory rabbit hole.
What do you think are some of the consequences of that then in those movements? I'm curious.
Well, there is the hyper commodification of spirituality. That's one thing. The idea that a practice can be bought, that a practice can be transferred to an individual without the cost of having to go through the sufferings involved with the practice. Of the many world traditions that still remain in existence today, not one of them has a, how shall we say, a get good quick scheme. Most, if not every, religious practice or spiritual practice throughout the world has always had, if you do this, then you have to go through these specific consequences or these specific kinds of hardships and trials and suffering. So you prove yourself worthy. There's always that caveat. It's not how the sanitized aspect of the practice is demonstrated with some of the less than ideal, occurrences that we see in some aspects of the spiritual tourism today. But which brings me to a very important question. How would you personally define your own spirituality? Because all this is very complex. I understand that the Viking part of your Guru Viking, it's just a name. However, the names that we choose for the things that we do oftentimes showcases a reflection of some aspect of ourselves that up to a specific period of time we have yet to either face or grow into. Or there are times when names are chosen for us and we grow into the name. And so, surviving in the wilds, living in a boat, being, out in the open, these are all very Vikingly things. And I think it's quite apropos.
Possibly, yeah. Possibly. That's very interesting. So how would I describe my
Spirituality.
personally? I would say well, there's a number of ways I could describe. I would say that. I would say something along the lines of appreciation, bordering on gratitude, bordering on devotion, maybe. I think those are quite related impulses. At least they seem to me to be related impulses.
Yeah, I agree.
To the experience, to this experience, something along those lines. Yeah, I feel a tremendous. It's very humbling, in fact, to really experience just the sensations of breathing or perception, etc. It's a remarkable thing to be alive. Sounds a bit cliche, but I'm afraid there you have it. I think it's a remarkable thing to be alive, and I'm very grateful. I'm not sure who to what in particular, but I am grateful to have that experience and to be alive. And I feel there's such an abundance of generosity in the experience of being alive somehow that it's quite it's almost sort of obliterating to think about that. And so there's this tremendous sense of of being just very fortunate, undeserved blessing. I think the Christian idea of grace, at least certain concepts of it, has that kind of an idea. This undeserved riches of being alive, because I didn't, at least as far as I know, earn this. I don't remember having earned this at all. But here we are. It's remarkable.
That's one of the aspects of, according to Hinduism, when you reach a certain point where you become what they call Jivan Mukta, a living enlightened being, or close to enlightened as possible. Because who truly is enlightened? Who can say? You feel an unyielding. The term in the Vedas is an unyielding gratitude for all things. So I see now where the guru part fits in. Jake?
It's hard to follow up with. Like, it made me think about, like, for myself at least, I find myself in a space where I still experiment and oscillate, where I place my gratitude to is insofar as existing in an existential sense or a day-to-day sense. I definitely have had periods of my life where I'm seated in more personal gratitude and gratitude for things around me, in a reverential sense where I'm simply grateful for my senses to see, to feel, to touch, and so that kind of made me think about times in my life where maybe I attributed that to like a deification of a figure, or or just to, like, in an agnostic sense, just to existence and experience itself, or to my parents, or to humanity in evolutionary biology, like that. So it's interesting. I appreciate it, like a very grounded, like just coming back to the experience, back to the breath, back to the sense gates, and the immense value in that. So that was my observation, or the experience I was feeling for myself as that was shared. I wanted to go into going back into the somatic aspect. I wanted to hear a bit more about the movement koan method and the linear movement method, and the somatic practices that you've shared, experienced, and taught.
Okay. Well, Movement Koan Method, as it's called, is it's got two words there, movement and koan, and I'm going to follow Alex's point here to break down the name and what is the significance of that. Well, the movement part, because it refers to the fact that it involves moving the body in joint nourishing ways. And there's more to be said about that, but for the time being, maybe I'll just say that. And the koan part, well, koan, of course, is a training technique in Zen. And basically, it's a kind of riddle Now, it's not really a kind of a riddle, but that's one way of describing it. The teacher poses you a question. What's the sound of one hand clapping? Show me your face before you were born. Does a dog have Buddha nature? Something like that. Gives you a question like that, and you go off and meditate on that question. And there's a whole series of them that you can work through. And they're supposed to bring you to the point of enlightenment or awakening, as far as the Zen tradition describes that. But there are also sets that you can do after you've had awakening experiences to deepen and flesh out, the awakening experience and so on. So it's a setup, in other words. It's a sort of setup for inquiry or investigation in a Zen sense. So the same way, the movements that we do in Movement Koan Method are a somatic koan, a sort of movement koan, a setup. So they set up a field of inquiry. And there are various different ways they do that. And the idea is that they ask you a kind of question or pose an inquiry to you as you do them that opens the possibility of various kinds of insight. And what sort of insights people have depends. I, of course, may have something in mind when I pose a koan, but because of the nature of inquiry, I had this idea of inquiry over imposition. Rather than the teacher saying, this is the answer, I have it, you don't, let me give it to you, etc. There's all sorts of problems with that. But one of the problems is that such an insight's no use to you unless you experience it yourself. Even if the teacher does have the answer, if we could even say that, they can't give it to you like that. All they can do is help you find it yourself. Sort of inquiry-based approach. And so these movement koans are designed to stimulate that sort of an inquiry. For example, to give you an example, one of the things we do is shift the weight to one foot. So you're standing on one leg and then you swing the other leg back and forth gently, And so you're sort of balancing on one foot and swinging the other one back and forth. And I invite you, if you're doing it, to see how much you can relax the base leg and foot while still maintaining the posture. How much can you relax the base leg and foot while still maintaining the posture? Minimum necessary muscular activation. Of course, minimum possible muscular activation, you'd be totally relaxed on the ground. So you need a certain degree of tension or activation in the leg in order to remain standing. And so you begin to question the layers of tension and activation that you're using in the leg to see, do you need it all, and trying to relax the excess. And when you do that, there are a few things you might notice. So here's a few things you might notice. And I might sort of prompt this, or I might just leave it open, depends. One of them is that when you relax the leg, you're on one leg. If you do that for a little while, it starts to get tired. And if you relax the leg, you tend to feel the fatigue more. The feeling of the fatigue increases. Because we don't only use tension for the act that it appears to be for, in this case, standing on one leg, but we also use it as an anesthesia to numb pain or sensation in general. So, for example, a child gets, an injection or something like that, they tense their whole body up, And so we use a tension like that. And when you relax those layers of tension that are serving as an anesthetic, you'll feel more. So that's an interesting insight to recognize what's going on there. And then you have a choice, because, of course, using muscular tension to drown out the consequence of muscular tension, which is muscular fatigue, it's not a very good long-term strategy. You're using the very thing that's causing you to be tired in order to drown out the feeling of it. So you can either feel it and endure, or resist it and probably not last quite as long. You're sort of fighting yourself. So this is all to do with, meditation. We have all these sorts of metaphors to do with resistance and, conductivity of sensation and so on. So it's a little bit in that direction. Something else you might notice is that we also brace the body, or tense the leg in this case, in anticipation of future balancing needs. There may be a sense in which part of the activation of the leg is an attempt to be ready for what might happen next. maybe I need to tense here or there or adjust in some sort of a way. Because we have this idea of balancing over time. That if we're swinging the leg back and forth for, 60 seconds, just for argument's sake, we have the sense that we have to balance for 60 seconds. And in some sense, we do. But actually, we can't really do that. All we can do is balance now. All you can do is balance now. If you're tensing in anticipation of a future balancing need, you're tensing for something that isn't happening. So you can relax that anticipation and just balance now. And if you balance now, you'll be balanced now. And just keep doing that, and you'll be balanced now. There's no other time you can be balanced than now. And that's true a lot of times in life, that a lot of the suffering, the thoughts, psychological, emotional turmoil that we experience is about anticipated events. And it's good to be able to make that distinction. What's happening now and what is an anticipation of what might happen next. And that's another classic meditation point, I suppose you could say. And the good thing about doing it in the body is, well, not only does it, you can move your body, which is good, meditators were sitting around all day, but also if you can get it in the body, a tangible venue for inquiry, if you can get it in the body, you go, aha, you see that dynamic in the body, you get that insight related to the body, then in a way that somatic reference point can inform all other kinds of situations, because you could also learn it conceptually. We mentioned before the difference between conceptual learning and experiential learning, where you read about an idea and you try to push it into yourself and you try to find it in circumstances. Well, here we're experiencing a dynamic, we're experiencing a situation, and we're experiencing a principle, if you like, physically. You get a felt sense for it. It's there, it's happening now. And from that, the insight comes. And then it's easier to apply in other situations. You know, oh, this is a little bit like that Movement Koan movement that we do. Oh, that's a little bit like minimum necessary muscular activation. You find yourself going to do a task that you're procrastinating about. And if you're going to do a task you're procrastinating about, it can feel like such a terrible burden, so heavy. Oh, it's such a horrible thing to do. And then if you analyze what's really going on there, a lot of the times, a lot of that resistance, a lot of that tension is about some sort of future projection of the scope of the task, fantasies about what else you might be doing. It could be a number of things. But if you drop the minimum, if you go to the minimum necessary muscular activation, you drop all that excess activity of the self, of the mind and so on, and just turn yourself to the task and do it with the minimum necessary muscular activation as efficiently as you possibly can, you'll find you've started very often. I'm not saying this is a universal cure for procrastination or something like that. I'm just saying that procrastination is an area in which this kind of a principle might manifest itself from having done it in the body.
You just summed up the core of Buddhist philosophy in less than 5 minutes. Living in the moment, as demonstrated by standing like a flamingo on a river. That's amazing. That's amazing. And this is where the martial arts fits into the puzzle.
Right.
So now I wonder, are you sure you're not a Shaolin monk?
You're right. This is, of course, very much informed by martial arts, because martial arts has, depending on the martial art, very often has a kind of contemplative dimension or implication to it. And a lot of times people who do martial arts do find that it goes much further than just physical fitness or competition or self-defense and so on. Very often it seems to give people a deeper kind of something from it. And I remember in my childhood, we used to do martial arts, and we'd stand there in the class with our hands out. It felt like forever, but it's probably only a minute or something, But, when you're 6 or something, it feels like a lot, just like the movies. And the arm starts to get tired. And you start to realize that the secret to enduring in a posture like that is minimum necessary muscular activation, is relaxing, is if you grit your teeth and you really try to push and all this sort of stuff, you're burning all that energy. You need that energy because you're going to be standing there for quite some time. Or other times we would finish a session of sparring at the end of the class, and immediately the teacher would have us sit in a kneeling posture on the wooden floor. And so we were very tired and heaving for breath. And we'd sit down, and I remember distinctly, he would point out to us, he'd say, basically, if I give you a bit more of the concept than he would have said himself, he would have said things like relax your breathing, that sort of thing. But what he was trying to point us to was there's a sense in which breathing like that after exertion, part of it's you're trying to get oxygen in, but part of it's kind of a self-soothing action. Because, you're tired and you're expressing that and you're demonstrating that and you're showing that and you're soothing yourself in this sort of a way. There's all this psychological component, which is very vaguely related to your oxygen debt that you're trying to replenish. So he'd have us control our breathing. Breathe in, breathe out, and your lungs are on fire, wanting more oxygen, but he'd have us breathe in, breathe out, and notice that kind of frantic quality of the mind and the body as distinct from the need to replenish the oxygen. That's a very subtle lesson, I think, and one that I took to heart in those days. How much of behavior appears to be about one thing and may have a bit of that in it, but a lot of it is about other psychological or emotional needs being expressed or met or performed or something like that. So you're right. Martial arts certainly informs the sort of movement Koan design, I would say. Mm-hmm.
Well, one thing I was contemplating as you're sharing that was like doing somatic body movements to help people who may be holding on to muscular tension due to like long-standing beliefs that they may carry, or traumas, or somatic mental injuries they've endured. Either from childhood or as adults, or from experiencing like a rough workplace or family dynamics. So I was kind of curious about some experiences that this practice may have helped people with, insofar as like encountering these things, either foreshadowing bad experiences happening, or anticipation of violence to occur, like it is, as many trauma survivors have. Like there's an anticipation and preparedness the body has, and so then there's that holding on of muscular tension. I'm curious of what that might be like to drop, to just come to the minimum muscle activation and see whether that armor's been activated, or if that, or the anticipation of that future event still remains.
Yes, you raise a very interesting point, which is the role of the relationship between trauma and the body. And it's, as you know, I'm sure, because I can hear it in your question, you're aware that there's quite a bit of recent theory, last, I suppose, 20, 25 years, about that. Some of the famous books, Peter Levine has written several, Waking the Tiger and that sort of thing, or Bessel van der Kolk's The Body Keeps the Score, that sort of thing. And they propose that there's a degree to which trauma is not only cognitive or psychological in the memories, so to speak, but also somehow in the nervous system, really, is what it comes down to, in the nervous system, and which expresses itself. One of the ways, as you point out, bodily tension can be like that. And so they have an old world, new world model. The old world is psychotherapy. You go and talk about your problems, your traumas, and you explore them in a safe environment. And, you learn various strategies to work through that. But you're sitting on a couch, basically. It's not really involving the body at all. And that's the old world. And they say, well, the problem with that is it leaves the bodily part unaddressed. And so they have proposed all these somatic therapies, like somatic experiencing, or Grimberg therapy is another one. And they suggest that they are able to address the bodily part of it. And some of them even go so far as to say that these bodily patterns don't even need the narrative associated with them to come up for you to work with them, because certain things, you get an injury or trauma at a certain age, frequency of gets added on later. Many things get added on. So its root may be way back. But there are many little stories we can tell about it as we've encountered that kind of a situational kind of dynamic throughout life, and it all gets stored or reinforces these sorts of patterns that we hold. And then as for what Movement Koan Method and similar sorts of modalities can do about that, I make a distinction between trauma release modalities that are and activities that can release trauma. I'll be a bit more precise about that. Trauma release modalities they're activities designed to deal with trauma. Okay, their main job is to deal with trauma. They might have secondary or tertiary benefits. If there's movement, then maybe there's a bit of nice sort of movement benefit or so. But basically, they're designed for that. There are other activities, the purpose of which is something else, the primary purpose, but it may have the secondary or tertiary effect of helping with someone's trauma. But the list of those activities is vast. Going for a hike, joining a hiking group, joining a book club, doing Movement Koan Method, going to the gym. I mean, there are many activities that people do, going to your yoga class, taking up meditation, that arguably they're not really designed to address trauma primarily, but actually engaging in them can help people with their traumas, right? But crucially, they're not mainly designed for that. So I'm not saying that activities like that can't be helpful. Of course they can, but it's just not their main purpose. And so I think if one does have trauma, that one knows one has and one wants to work with that, then seeking out a modality that's designed specifically for that, like somatic experiencing, Grimberg method, that sort of thing, to address that physical level is optimal. So yes, sometimes people are doing Movement Koan Method and have all kinds of personal epiphanies, and it can be very helpful for them. But like I say, that's very much in that second camp of secondary or tertiary benefits. I'm aware of the dynamics of trauma and so on, but if something really big was to come, if someone was to come and say to me, "I have trauma, can you help heal that with Movement Koan Method?" I would say you should find a trauma therapy modality. Actually, that's really what you should be doing primarily to deal with your trauma.
That's a very grounded take on the matter, because in other respects, you'd have ayahuasca retreats to help deal with trauma, or something that just recently came up in my country is pretend to be a dog for a day to help deal with trauma. Now, I do not know whether or not this is accredited by any psychological association to any degree or capacity, but it is gaining traction. And I, for one, am like WTF. But whatever floats their boat, However, different strokes for different folks. But would you say, though, that as an accompaniment, if you will, to any sort of awareness or mindfulness practice, as well as an accompaniment to any sort of spiritual and or religious practice, would you say that the mindfulness Koan method is something that would help an individual either progress further or allow them to be more at home with a more, shall we say, level-headed, contemplative, grounded sort of lifestyle? Because, if you can sum up the entirety of Buddhist philosophy by, being a flamingo, that has to mean something.
Yeah. Well, I think there are a couple of ways that Movement Koan Method could help a meditator. One of them, like I said already, is you're getting your body moving. And that's good for meditators. A lot of times we think about meditation as a static activity, sitting, and often sitting in a posture that a lot of people are unaccustomed to, like sitting cross-legged or something like that. And so, getting up and moving is probably good. As for these sorts of movement koans, I mean, the way you can access Movement Koan Method at the moment is, I'm not teaching a great deal at the moment, so probably you can catch me somewhere, maybe, probably not. I have a couple of very low-priced DVD downloads on my website, and that's it. So there's not really I can't unfortunately offer membership into the secret order of the Movement Koan. But if what I've said sounds interesting, if my description sounds interesting, then, and you're a meditator, then why not? I guess you can give it a go and see what you think. It's definitely designed for meditators. I would say that was its original sort of conception, really. Get the body moving, take up certain themes that arise in meditation and place them in a somatic context. So could it help? I suppose it could help. But, so could going for a hike, so could joining your local book group and reading the collected works of Plato or something like that. I mean, there are a lot of things that could be interesting for a meditator. But if my description sounds interesting that I've given, then yeah, why not give it a try?
I wanted to also ask, if you could help distinguish the linear movement method with the movement Koan method. What do you feel like is the key difference with the linear movement method?
Well, it's actually called the non-linear movement method, funnily enough.
Excuse me. Misread that.
Yeah, that's okay. That's something that was developed by Michaela Bohm, who has been my teaching partner for quite some time. She's a famous or well-regarded relationship counselor and workshop teacher and that sort of thing. And the idea behind that is that you don't follow a particular choreography. So a movement Koan method, as an example, it's a bit like yoga or qigong in the sense that there are certain movements that you do, and you follow along a sort of choreography, you could say, that I'd describe. Just like in a yoga class, it's a bit the same. And but non-linear movement method, you don't do that. So instead, non-linear movement method is you're on a yoga mat, that's how they do it, on your hands and knees typically, and there is a certain setup to describe what you're going to do, and then you allow your body to move kind of intuitively. So, for example, you feel what's there to be felt. One of the techniques, for example, is moving what you're feeling, and then whatever you feel, you just kind of allow your body to move. So, if you feel agitation, you just allow your body to move. You're not trying to just demonstrate agitation. You're not trying to show agitation like a theater performance, but you just allow the sensations to kind of move the body in a way. And maybe you feel numbness, so you allow numbness is an experience. You allow yourself to move that. Maybe you feel fear. Maybe you feel maybe you don't know what you feel, and you allow that to move. And it's a way of stimulating, you could say, embodiment in that technique, feeling the sensations of the body. There are also versions of that which involve contacting and cultivating pleasurable states. There are versions that focus on release. Michaela's a trauma therapist, also so focus on release of tension, stress, and yes, indeed, perhaps even traumas and so on. And there's very many different ways that modality is used. But the nonlinear part refers to the fact that there's no fixed choreography.
Would you say that the nonlinear method or approach is similar to Kyogyu, walking meditation? There is a practice in Zen called Kyogyu, which is where monks would take a stroll or do whatever, and that is their meditation.
I think it's certainly similar in some respects, different in others. There are many different sorts of walking meditations, as you know, and some of them are more sort of regimented than others.
Ordered.
Some you have to hold your hands in a certain position, and you walk at a fast pace, kind of marching around. Other times in a line. Other times a row rather, and then other times you do these very slow meditations where you're just walking very slowly and you're trying to note every phase of the foot. So rising, place, moving, placing, that sort of thing. And there's this sort of there are certain types that involve you've got to walk a certain way. And there are other types that involve a sort of spontaneous walking, where you allow the body to walk. And actually what you try to do is you try not to control it particularly. You try to allow the body to just spring into action using the knowledge it has of walking to do it. And your job is to allow, I mean, the principle of that, this is Shinzen, one of my teachers, I mentioned him again, calls this auto walk. The idea is that usually if you're paying attention to something, you're doing it consciously. But there are other times when you walk unconsciously. You're on the phone and you're just walking. You're not trying to walk. You're not controlling it. It's sort of happening. But the key there is you're not paying attention to it. So if you pay attention to walking, mostly that means a kind of controlled walking. And if you're not paying attention, if the walking is spontaneous, if you want, or then you're not paying attention to it. Usually attention and that kind of spontaneity don't tend to come together in something like walking. But in that technique, you try to bring them together. So you allow the body to walk just as it would if you were unconsciously just talking on the phone and walking to the shop. But you attempt to bring awareness, if you like, to that process. So you're riding the circuits. You're riding the motor circuits of automaticity. And this cultivates something that Shinzen calls the Zen bounce. And you can have this sense of just, piercing through space, or the world collapsing behind you, because there is that experience as you walk. Then suddenly everything you see, eventually it passes behind you and it's gone. I mean, it's there if you look, but it's experientially it's gone. There's a collapsing behind you of content of space. And they can this tremendous sense of being propelled. Spontaneity. It's one of the contemplative, dimensions that are trained in certain traditions. So I would say, nonlinear is maybe a little bit more related to that kind of a thing, where one's allowing the body to do its thing whilst being there, than it has to do with those more regimented styles of walking, where you're controlling every micro movement. I would say it's got more to do with the former than the latter.
Nice. It's good to know.
Yeah.
How's that different, like, to do like a somatic practices like the Zen like or like a walking practice on a boat, like with the water rising and falling and the shifting of balances. I wonder how that feels.
Yeah. I like it very much, actually. Right now it's very windy, so the boat is moving. You probably can't tell because, of course, my laptop is also on the boat, so it's sort of moving with the boat, right? But if you're meditating, I'm sitting here in sort of meditation, posture, right? If you're meditating and you have some sort of degree of verticality, and then the base is moving a little bit, it's really nice. It's
going to be fun.
Yeah, it's I'm exaggerating now, but it can have this kind of you can see my my head is kind of remaining relatively level whilst the body moves underneath. It can have a very nice feeling, actually. And the same with standing meditation. If you're doing standing meditation or postures of various kinds, it's really nice to have that kind of movement somehow coming from below. But other people will probably find it deeply unsettling.
I have a very if this is too personal of a question, please feel free to refuse an answer. But among my people, there is a specific tribe who originally were seafaring merchants called the Sama Bajau. And for the better part of 600 years, they were boat-faring people. Their houses were literally on boats, and they lived primarily in the oceans. And in the past 25 or so years, they have slowly been displaced and their sea nomadic lifestyle taken away from them, wherein they were forced to live as landed individuals. And, this is a culture that for 600 years is the seafaring people. Their god is a god of the ocean. Their perspectives are determined by the ebb and flow of the tides and so on and so forth. Their entire mythologies and their worldview is shaped by the ocean. So putting someone with sea legs on the ground hardly counts as good practice, if you will, if we're being honest. But would you say that your your own, seafaring lifestyle has influenced your outlook and your ideologies somewhat?
Gosh. I'm not really sure which comes first. The preference for this sort of a life setup, which leads to living like this, or the other way around. There are a few things I could say perhaps that I like about living on a boat. One of them is I like the compact space. It's 6'10" wide and 57 foot long. So it's basically like an apartment with all the rooms in one row, And when you drive the boat, which one does from behind, you can see the whole thing, the whole boat in front of you, obviously. And I like that feeling. I like that sense of containment. All my stuff, all my books mostly are in here. And I like that. I like the small, relatively smaller space. There's something about it that I enjoy. And I enjoy the freedom, the sense that at any moment I can untie the boat and just move anywhere. I like that. Now, whether I do it or not, how often I do it isn't the point. It's almost the prospect of it, the possibility of it that I somehow enjoy. I really enjoy being near nature. It's a steel hull. And so when it's cold, you have to light the fire. And I like to do that. I feel, in a way, more in touch with the rhythms of the seasons. When it's cold, the boat gets cold, so you put the fire on. It's not like a house with central heating or air conditioning, where it's keeping a constant temperature all year round, depending on, using those technologies. I have heating here, and all that, but it's not that kind of a setup. I really like that. Yeah, so I like being in nature. I like when I wake up in the morning, I can feel the water moving. I open the side hatch. The water is there, maybe some swans or a duck or trees and that sort of thing. I like that it has a big water tank in the hull, which I fill myself, and a toilet that I empty myself, and an engine that powers the batteries for the electricity and all that. I just like the, if you want, more direct contact with those facts of life.
It's a very involved lifestyle, I would say, and involved in that there is no aspect of your life in which you do not exercise some degree of control, or where there are aspects that you cannot control because you can't control the weather, you can't control the water, you can't control happenstances. You instead control your reaction to the things you can't control. So I sort of get this feeling, that you're living something akin to a very monastic lifestyle. Whether indirectly or directly, the guru moniker fits.
Yeah, I would like to be a monk, actually, except I don't know if I could deal with all the other monks. So maybe I should be a hermit like you.
There are hermit monks, and I am not an ordained monk, but I am a hermit. So there's that.
Well, we have that yearning in common. I enjoy solitude very much. I love people, actually. I love people very much and enjoy being with people. But I think my deepest heart is happiest in solitude.
Yeah, it's made me think of the monastic lifestyle a bit. And what do you feel like are some misconceptions about leading a more or hermit lifestyle in solitude that maybe friends, family, or folks who either are practitioners or aren't practitioners might not understand about the value of solitude and living a contemplative, reflective life?
Yeah, there's a very interesting book by Anthony Storr called Solitude, actually. And it's been a little while since I've read that, but my memory of it is that he suggests that psychology as a discipline has tended to orient towards relationship as the main indicator of psychological health, and therefore the main venue of psychological work. That it's somehow healthier psychologically to be in relationship somehow or another than it is to be in solitude or something like that. And he challenges that idea. And he suggests that actually that's one aspect of psychological health or one mode of being. But, and then he gives lots and lots of examples from history of figures who enjoyed solitude. And he suggests that there's also a way in which solitude can be seen, or the capacity for solitude can also be seen, brought into the picture of psychological health in some sort of a way. So, if you cannot be alone, for example, isn't that, who said that many of man's great problems come from the inability to be in a room by himself? I forget now who said that.
I think that's Anthony Trollope.
Is it Anthony Trollope?
I think so. If I recall correctly, it's Anthony Trollope, but I might be wrong.
Well, whoever said it, whether it's Anthony Trollope or whoever it is, I think it may have been, anyway. There's something to be said for that too.
I agree.
And Anthony Storr basically in this book suggests that just different people express a different ratio of relationship and solitude, being with people and being alone, so to speak, and that it's okay if you have a tendency for solitude and that sort of thing. Doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with you. It might, but it doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with you. I think ultimately from a sort of spiritual path point of view, we began talking about that. Happiness independent of conditions is, if you want, one of the ultimate ideals. And that you're as Kipling said in that poem, if you're as happy in a palace as you are, on a boat. You can be with people, you can be by yourself. You have preferences, undoubtedly, for different, whichever it may be. You like this, that, but you're able to have that flexibility of identity to be in a different kind of a situation than maybe is your preference. So maybe that's also part of it. So what are some of the misconceptions of solitude? Maybe some of the misconceptions of solitude is that you get lonely. And I think there's a kind of intimacy one can have in solitude that's just as nourishing. But that being said, I don't want to make out here that I'm a total hermit who lives on this boat far from anybody and doesn't see anyone. It's not like that. But I would just say that my deepest heart loves solitude. There's nothing I like better really than waking up on the boat and it's just quiet in the morning, the light's coming in, there's not much to do that day. I can come through here, pick up a book, have a cup of coffee and just read a book, and sort of thing. It's just fantastic. I really like that.
This is where we have the seafaring Bilbo Baggins. So,
that's a good point.
I cannot help but agree. I think one of the problems with I won't say modern day society, because for a good chunk of modern society, human beings have actually enjoyed some measure of solitude. But with current day society, it would appear as though they cannot reconcile that an individual can both be part of a community, but also whole and entire unto themselves. So much so that they have created the illusion of isolation in order to market a solution that isn't really a solution. So I guess, if we are going to, if someone, not we, it's a misnomer, it's not really our problem, it's more of an individual or an individualistic problem. But if there are to be solutions, I guess one of the best ways to go about it is for individuals to just dedicate a good chunk of their time to be by themselves, for themselves. in the absence of any other input from anybody else, wherein they have a control, over, hey, I want some community. So I'm going to go to the community. Oh, I've had enough community. I'm going to retreat back to my hobbit house. And for a good chunk of human society, that's how we've been. That's how we've been. There's no forced interaction, no constant chronic need to prove the validity of your existence by always showing that I went here. I did this with these people. I ate this with these people. It's a chronic putting yourself out there that's draining us dry.
Yeah.
I appreciate that, Alex, because I appreciate those examples too, because I definitely had like an internalized voice sometimes is like, oh, you should put yourself out there more. Or, why don't you post your food on Instagram? And I'm like, I don't want to post my food on Instagram. Like I like my privacy, and I like being alone a lot of the time. And it'd be nice to have a few people to touch base with about things I enjoy or my experiences. But I feel greatly satisfied with my solitude and privacy. And it's not aloneness. It's like it's nourishment to spend time to myself and to contemplate or to read or to do self-care in that way. And made me think of that, like 100 years ago, 90% of humanity were agrarian. They lived on farms, or like you said, that gave me a vision of like people walking out to the farmer's market, and then they come back into their farm for the next 6 days and tend to livestock and do their contemplative work while they're tilling the farm or working with cattle.
They have a selective community. That is to say, in a village, everybody knows everybody else. And this is still true within rural areas of my country today. But in spite of the fact that everybody knew everybody else, you could pick and choose which people you've spent your time with, if at all. If at all. Because here in my own neighborhood, and this is a relatively modern neighborhood, but there's a sign outside the gate where no solicitors wanted, no evangelicals wanted. We sacrifice babies for a living. It's posted outside the door. So they leave us alone.
Is that last marker true, or is that a joke?
Oh, no. Actually, the thing is, the sign outside the gate says no business except party business. I'm quoting Bilbo. I had that printed out and trying no business except party business. If I posted a sign that says we sacrifice babies for a living, I would go to jail. I can't do that.
Yeah, I was thinking, I was like, it's too edgelord for me. The parting is funny. I like that. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, and so and Steve, like, are there any like parting pieces of advice or thoughts or contemplations you'd like to offer listeners, viewers about the practices that you share, the Koan method, or living a lifestyle of deeper contemplation and practice?
Well, I think I find it difficult to come up with advice in such a general way. I mean, there are many things I could say about many things, but to whom am I speaking and about what? That being said, I think well, perhaps I'll just say this then. The podcast. So I have a podcast, Guru Viking Podcast, as we've mentioned. Maybe we should call it Bilbo Viking Podcast. No, I think that's better. And there, it's not. This is a bit unusual, really. In the podcast, I'm not generally holding forth about all my various sort of personal. You've asked me a lot of personal questions about my lifestyle and my own thoughts about certain things, and I've enjoyed that very much. But my podcast doesn't focus on that. So it's not sermon of the week for me or anything like that. It's me interviewing other people about their life and teaching and work or whatever the case may be. And so that's available. Like I said, if you are interested in Movement Koan Method, having heard about this, you can find it on the website, guruviking.com, there. And nonlinear movement method, which you brought up as well, you can find on michaelabohm.com. That there's all information about it there, and she teaches lots of classes about that, and even teacher trainings about that, actually, to facilitate that. So I think if anything that's been we've discussed tickles your fancy in some sort of a way, those are the main avenues to find out more.
Fantastic. Any last questions, Alex?
No. Like everything that's been discussed so far tickles my fancy. So what I want to do is go to this boat, knock there, and maybe go on an adventure and slay a water dragon. Because mountain dragons are a no-go. Let's go for water dragons instead.
Yes. Well, you're both very welcome if you're ever in the UK to come to the boat, and we'll go on a little river adventure.
Oh, that would be great.
Love it. Yeah, thank you so much, Steve. Thank you so much.